Karen scowled at her phone, her fingers tapping furiously as she typed out yet another angry message to her homeowners association. This is completely unacceptable. She fumed, her face flushing with indignation. I've been complaining about that barking dog for weeks, and nothing has been done. She pressed send, the self-righteous certainty that she was in the right fueling her outrage. As the president of the HOA, she fully expected her demand to be met with swift action. After all, she was paying a premium to live in this upscale neighborhood, and the constant noise from her neighbor's dog was simply intolerable. Just then, her husband, Kevin, walked into the room, a concerned expression on his face. Another complaint. Huh. He sighed, already knowing the answer. Karen shot him a withering look. Of course. That mutt has been barking nonstop for days. It's driving me insane. Kevin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation. Honey, have you actually gone over there and talked to them about it? Talk to them. Karen scoffed. Why should I have to do that? They're the ones being inconsiderate. It's their responsibility to keep their dog quiet. But, Kevin started, only to be cut off by his wife's raised hand. No buts, Kevin. I pay my HOA fees, and I expect them to handle this. If they don't, I'll make sure they regret it. With that, Karen stormed out of the room, leaving her husband to wonder just how far she was willing to take this. The next day, Karen strode into the HOA office, her chin held high and her eyes blazing with determination. I want something done about that barking dog, and I want it done now, she demanded, her voice dripping with authority. The office manager, a meek-looking woman named Sarah, shifted nervously in her chair. Mrs. Harrington, I understand your frustration, but we've already reached out to your neighbors several times. They claim the dog isn't barking, and... Isn't barking? Karen interrupted, her nostrils flaring. I have video evidence that says otherwise. With that, she thrust her phone into Sarah's face, the audio of the dog's incessant yapping filling the small office. Sarah winced, her brow furrowing as she listened. Well, that certainly sounds like a barking dog, but... But nothing, Karen snapped. I want that dog removed from the neighborhood immediately. If you don't do something about this, I'll... Her threat was cut short as the video suddenly shifted, revealing a group of people dancing to loud music, the dog nowhere to be seen. Sarah blinked in confusion, her mouth hanging open as she stared at the screen. Karen's face flushed with embarrassment, her eyes widening in horror as she realized her mistake. That's not the right video, she stammered, fumbling to turn off the screen. Mrs. Harrington, it appears there may have been a misunderstanding, Sarah said cautiously, trying to defuse the situation. But Karen was already storming out of the office, her cheeks burning with humiliation. As she hurried to her car, she couldn't help but wonder how she was going to live this down. The next day, Karen paced anxiously around her living room, her mind racing with ways to salvage her reputation. The embarrassment of the mistaken video still stung, and she knew she needed to act quickly to regain control of the situation. This is all that stupid dog's fault, she muttered under her breath, her manicured nails digging into the palms of her hands. Determined to set things right, Karen marched over to her neighbor's house, her posture rigid and her expression set in a stern frown. She raised her hand to knock, but before she could, the door swung open, revealing a young woman with a cheerful smile. Hello, Mrs. Harrington. Can I help you with something? The neighbor, Emily, asked. Karen hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the friendly greeting. Yes, actually. I'm here about the dog situation. Emily's smile faltered slightly. Oh, I see. Well, I can assure you that we've been doing our best to keep the dog quiet. We even took him to obedience training, but... That's not good enough, Karen interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. I've been more than patient, and I expect this issue to be resolved immediately. Emily's brow furrowed in confusion. But Mrs. Harrington, I thought we had cleared up the misunderstanding about the video yesterday. There's no barking dog, just our neighbor's music that sometimes gets a bit loud. Karen felt her face flush with a mix of embarrassment and irritation. I don't care what your excuses are. That dog needs to be removed from the neighborhood, and I won't rest until it is. Emily's expression shifted to one of concern. Mrs. Harrington, I really think there's been a misunderstanding here. Perhaps we cooled. No more excuses, Karen shouted, cutting her off. If you won't do something about that dog, then I'll make sure the HOA does. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her house, her mind already formulating her next move. Later that evening, Karen sat in her living room, her fingers tapping furiously on her laptop as she composed yet another angry email to the HOA. She outlined the situation in excruciating detail, painting herself as the long-suffering victim and her neighbor as the inconsiderate perpetrator. There, that should do it, she muttered, a self-satisfied smirk spreading across her face as she hit send. Little did she know, her actions were about to have far-reaching consequences that she could never have imagined. The next morning, Karen awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing with a flurry of notifications. Eager to see the results of her latest email, she snatched it up, her eyes scanning the messages with growing excitement. Finally, someone is taking this seriously, she murmured, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. To her delight, the HOA had responded swiftly, promising to send a representative to investigate the situation immediately. Karen couldn't help but feel a surge of vindication. Her persistence had paid off, and she was about to see the fruits of her labor. Humming with satisfaction, she quickly dressed and made her way to the kitchen, eager to share the news with her husband. "Kevin, you'll never guess what happened," she exclaimed, bursting through the door. "The HOA is sending someone to deal with that dog today." Kevin, who had been sipping his coffee and reading the newspaper, looked up with a weary expression. "Karen, I thought we had cleared up the misunderstanding about the dog yesterday," he said, his voice tinged with exasperation. "Misunderstanding?" Karen scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "There's no misunderstanding. That dog is a nuisance, and I'm going to make sure it's removed from the neighborhood once and for all." Kevin sighed heavily, setting down his mug. "Honey, I really think you're overreacting here. The neighbors have been cooperative, and it seems like there might have been a mistake with the video." "A mistake?" Karen interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "Kevin, you know how important it is to me to maintain the standards of this community. I'm not going to let some inconsiderate pet owner ruin that." Before Kevin could respond, the doorbell rang, and Karen practically skipped to the front door, eager to confront the HOA representative. When she opened the door, however, she was met with the stern gaze of a police officer. "Mrs. Harrington?" the officer asked, his brow furrowed. "Yes, that's me," Karen replied, her confidence faltering slightly. "Ma'am, we've received a complaint about you harassing your neighbors. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the station to answer a few questions." Karen's mouth fell open, her mind racing as she tried to process what was happening. Harassing. But she glanced over her shoulder, only to see her neighbors, Emily and her husband, standing in their doorway, their expressions a mix of concern and irritation. As the officer gently but firmly guided her to his patrol car, Karen felt a growing sense of dread. Somehow, her quest to rid the neighborhood of the barking dog had spiraled out of control, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions. She couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up in this predicament, and what other surprises might be in store for her. As Karen sat in the back of the police car, her mind raced with a mix of panic and indignation. How dare they arrest her for simply trying to maintain the standards of her neighborhood? She was the president of the HOA, for goodness sake. She had a duty to uphold the rules and keep the community in order. When they arrived at the police station, Karen was ushered into a small, sterile-looking room where a stern-faced officer began to question her. "Ma'am, we've received several complaints from your neighbors regarding your behavior," the officer said, his tone neutral, but his eyes piercing. Karen straightened her posture, determined to assert her authority. "I'm the president of the HOA, and I have a responsibility too." "That's irrelevant," the officer interrupted. "The complaints allege that you've been harassing your neighbors and making unreasonable demands regarding a pet that doesn't even exist." Karen's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, a pet that doesn't exist?" "I have clear video evidence of that dog barking." The officer reached into a manila folder and pulled out a printed screenshot from the video Karen had shown the HOA representative. "This video clearly shows a group of people dancing to music, not a barking dog." Karen felt her face flush with embarrassment as she stared at the image. That must have been a mistake. I assure you, there is a barking dog that is disrupting the peace of this neighborhood, and I have every right to." "Ma'am, your neighbors have stated that there is no barking dog," the officer interjected. "They claim you've been repeatedly harassing them over a non-existent issue, and they're prepared to file a restraining order if your behavior continues." Karen's mouth opened and closed several times as she struggled to find the words to defend herself. How could this be happening? She was the one in the right, the one trying to uphold the standards of the community. I don't understand," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and anger. The officer leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, I'm going to give you a warning this time, but if we receive any more complaints about your behavior, you'll be facing charges. I suggest you try to resolve this issue with your neighbors in a more constructive manner." With that, the officer stood and gestured for Karen to follow him. As she was led out of the room, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. She had never faced consequences for her actions before, and the prospect of a restraining order was deeply unsettling. As she made her way back home, Karen's mind raced with thoughts of how to salvage the situation. She couldn't let her neighbors get the upper hand. She was the president of the HOA, and she was determined to maintain her authority, no matter the cost. The drive home from the police station was a silent and tense affair. Karen's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, confusion, and a growing sense of unease. As she pulled into the driveway, she caught a glimpse of her neighbors, Emily and her husband, standing in their front yard. They were speaking animatedly, their expressions a mix of concern and exasperation. Karen's grip tightened on the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. She couldn't believe that these people had the audacity to complain about her, the president of the HOA, no less. Didn't they understand the importance of maintaining the community's standards? Determined to set the record straight, Karen stormed out of her car and marched over to her neighbors, her chin held high. "All right, what's the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice dripping with accusation. Emily and her husband turned to face her, their expressions hardening. "Mrs. Harrington, we've already spoken to the police," Emily said, her tone measured but firm. "We've filed a formal complaint about your harassment, and we're prepared to take further legal action if necessary." Karen felt her face flush with indignation. "Harassment? I'm simply trying to uphold the standards of this community. That dog of yours has been a nuisance for weeks, and I won't stand for it." "But there is no dog," Emily exclaimed, her frustration evident. "The noise you've been complaining about is just our music, which we've already agreed to keep down. We've done everything we can to accommodate you, and yet you continue to harass us." Karen opened her mouth to retort, but the words caught in her throat. The realization that she had been mistaken slowly sank in, and she felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. I don't understand," she stammered, her bravado faltering. "It's time you started to," Emily's husband interjected, his voice stern. "You can't just go around making demands and bullying your neighbors because you think you're entitled to it. That's not how this community works." Karen's eyes widened, and she felt a lump forming in her throat. For the first time, she was confronted with the consequences of her actions, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. I'm sorry, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily's expression softened slightly, but her husband remained unyielding. Just try to be a better neighbor, okay? He said, before turning and leading his wife back into their home. Karen stood there, her shoulders slumped, as she watched them go. The realization that she had been in the wrong was a humbling experience, and it left her feeling small and ashamed. As she made her way back to her own house, Karen couldn't help but wonder how she had let things spiral so far out of control. She had always prided herself on her sense of entitlement and her ability to get her way, but now, it seemed, those very qualities had turned against her. With a heavy heart, she knew that she would have to find a way to make amends, not just with her neighbors, but with herself. As Karen stepped through the front door, she was greeted by the concerned face of her husband, Kevin. "Honey, what happened?" he asked, his brow furrowed with worry. The police just left, and they seemed pretty upset. Karen sighed heavily, the weight of her mistakes bearing down on her. "It's a long story, Kevin. I think I really messed up this time." She recounted the events at the police station, watching as Kevin's expression shifted from concern to a mixture of exasperation and disappointment. "Karen, I told you this was a misunderstanding," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Why couldn't you just listen to me and talk to the neighbors like a normal person?" Karen felt a pang of guilt as she met her husband's gaze. "I don't know, Kevin. I guess I just wanted to be right, and I didn't want to back down." "But at what cost?" Kevin replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "Now you're facing potential legal action, and you've alienated the entire neighborhood. Is it really worth it?" Karen shook her head, her eyes downcast. "No, of course not. I got so caught up in being the queen of the HOA that I forgot what really matters." Kevin moved closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Honey, I know how important this community is to you, but you can't just bully your way through everything. Sometimes you need to take a step back and really listen to the people around you." Karen nodded, feeling a lump forming in her throat. "You're right. I've been so focused on maintaining my image and my position that I lost sight of what's really important. I need to make this right." Kevin gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Well, that's a good start. But it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to do a lot of apologizing and make some real changes if you want to repair the damage you've done." Karen took a deep breath, steeling herself for the difficult road ahead. "I know, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes." With a renewed sense of determination, she set out to make amends with her neighbors, knowing that it would be an uphill battle. But for the first time in a long while, she was willing to put her ego aside and truly listen to the people around her. As she approached Emily's house, she felt a twinge of nervousness, but she pushed forward, determined to make things right. Karen took a deep breath and raised her hand to knock on Emily's door, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that this would be a difficult conversation, but she was determined to make things right. As the door opened, Emily's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, her tone cautious. "What can I do for you?" Karen mustered a small, apologetic smile. "Emily, I owe you an apology. Can we talk?" Emily hesitated for a moment, but then stepped aside, gesturing for Karen to come in. "All right, come on in." Karen followed Emily into the living room, her gaze darting around the cozy space. She couldn't help but notice the absence of a barking dog, and a wave of shame washed over her. "Emily, I'm so sorry for the way I've been behaving," Karen began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been completely out of line, and I know that now." Emily folded her arms across her chest, her expression unreadable. "Go on." I let my position as HOA president go to my head," Karen continued, her eyes downcast. I was so focused on maintaining what I saw as the standards of the community that I completely lost sight of what really matters: being a good neighbor and treating people with respect. She paused, taking a deep breath. I know I've caused you and your family a lot of trouble, and I can't even begin to apologize for that. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this right. Emily's expression softened slightly, and she nodded. Okay, I appreciate you saying that, but it's going to take more than just words to undo the damage you've done. Karen nodded quickly. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll apologize to the HOA. I'll help out in the community. I'll even pay for any legal fees you've incurred. I want to make this right. Emily studied her for a moment, then sighed. Look, Karen, I know you've been the president of the HOA for a long time, and that's clearly important to you. But you have to understand that your position doesn't give you the right to bully or harass your neighbors. Karen felt a pang of shame, but she nodded. You're absolutely right. I've been so focused on maintaining my own power and status that I've completely lost sight of what really matters. I promised I'm going to change that. Emily regarded her for a moment, then a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Okay, I believe you, but it's going to take time to rebuild that trust. Let's start with you coming over for dinner tonight, the whole family. We can start fresh, and you can meet our barking dog in person. Karen couldn't help but chuckle at the playful jab, and she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. I'd be honored. Thank you, Emily. As she turned to leave, Karen felt a newfound sense of hope. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was determined to become the kind of neighbor and community member she had always claimed to be. Over the next few weeks, Karen worked tirelessly to make amends and rebuild the trust she had so carelessly destroyed. She started by apologizing to the HOA board, acknowledging her mistakes, and vowing to be a more thoughtful and inclusive leader. To her surprise, the board members were receptive to her apology, and they even commended her for her willingness to take responsibility for her actions. We're glad to see you recognize the error of your ways, Karen, said the HOA treasurer, a kind-faced older woman named Mrs. Patel. Community is about more than just following the rules. It's about empathy, compassion, and working together for the greater good. Karen listened intently, her eyes wide with newfound understanding. You're absolutely right. I've been so focused on maintaining my own authority that I've lost sight of what's truly important. But I'm committed to changing that, starting today. With the board's support, Karen set out to make amends with her neighbors. She organized a community barbecue, where she personally apologized to Emily and her family, as well as the other residents she had antagonized. To Karen's delight, the event was a resounding success, with neighbors mingling and chatting as they enjoyed the food and music. Even Emily and her family seemed to have let go of their previous animosity, engaging in friendly conversation with Karen and her husband, Kevin. As the day drew to a close, Karen found herself standing on the sidelines, observing the scene with a mix of pride and humility. She couldn't believe how much her perspective had shifted in such a short amount of time. You know, honey, I'm really proud of you, Kevin said, coming up beside her and slipping his arm around her waist. Karen leaned into his embrace, a warm smile spreading across her face. I'm proud of myself, too. I never realized how much I was missing out on by being so much like myself. Kevin chuckled, giving her a gentle squeeze. It's a tough lesson to learn, but I'm glad you did. And I know the rest of the neighborhood is too. Karen nodded, her gaze sweeping across the gathering. You're right. I may have lost their trust, but I'm determined to earn it back, one neighborly gesture at a time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Karen felt a sense of optimism she hadn't experienced in a long time. She knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one, but she was ready to face the challenges head-on, with a newfound appreciation for the true meaning of community. With a contented sigh, she turned to Kevin, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you for sticking with me through all of this. I couldn't have done it without you." Kevin smiled, pulling her in for a warm embrace. "That's what I'm here for, Karen. Now let's go mingle with our neighbors. I hear there's a friendly dog who can't wait to meet you."